Usually when it's time to start writing a paper, it's common to think in broad concepts and then narrow down what you're going to write about. So for example, if I were in a history class and I decided that I wanted to write my paper on something dealing with African Americans, well, if I had just gone to a library database or a library catalog and typed in African Americans, I would be getting everything from history to politics, medicine, art, music, the whole gamut. So this is when I need to start thinking about, well, what about African Americans do I really want to learn? So, for example, if I decided that I wanted to focus in on African American history, that would actually reduce the number of things I'd have to look through. Also, if I decided that I really wanted to focus on African American history in the southern states, that would further reduce my number of results. And finally, if I wanted to say, oh, African American history in the southern states, but really focus on right after the Reconstruction period began, so looking at things like civil rights, the black codes, civil rights in general, then that would narrow things down even more. So the more specific you can be with your topic up front when you're trying to decide what to research, the fewer number of results you're going to have to look through. Now, part of that is developing a keyword strategy. And keywords are usually the people, places, things, in other words, the nouns that are in the question that you're trying to ask. So when it comes to formulating that question, well, maybe I'm in a history class and my first thought was, I want to look at something that happened in the time period of Reconstruction. Well, there are a number of things that I could look at, including the election of 1877, rebuilding of the actual infrastructure of the country due to the damage caused by the Civil War. But let's say I wanted to focus on African American history during the Reconstruction period. Well, so far we've got two keywords, Reconstruction and African Americans. But it's good to be a little more specific because there were a lot of things happening in the African American environment in that time period. So if I sit down and I think, well, what are some things I really want to zero in on? That's when I can come up with things like the black codes, the development of Jim Crow, the push for and ultimate loss of many civil rights in the South for African Americans. Now, this is the first part of developing keywords because, as you'll notice, all of these are nouns. But some authors are also going to use different words in place of the same thing. So, yep, you guessed it, synonyms. So, what I also need to do, and this is going to depend on what my topic is, but look at all of these bubbles for keywords that I'm planning on using and ask myself, what other words might be used in place of this? So if we use African Americans as an example, some authors might use blacks, some authors might use former slaves. So these are also additional keywords that we could consider adding. Now the next step is, how do we put these things together into a coherent search that a database will actually understand? Well, this is an example. And this is an example of a fairly detailed search. You definitely don't have to be this complicated when you start using a database, but I'm just going to decipher this really quickly for you. So the first line is basically telling a database, find me an article that has either the phrase African Americans, or the word blacks, or the phrase former slaves. Either of those three are fine. Now, when we add the next line underneath, and acts like a giant plus symbol. So what that's telling the database is now, okay, any article that has African Americans or blacks or former slaves, as long as the phrase civil rights or the phrase black codes or the phrase Jim Crow is also present in those articles. So we could be looking at African Americans and black codes, we could be looking at African Americans and civil rights, or we could be looking at African Americans and Jim Crow. Now, that's why we've also added and Reconstruction, because especially when you have African Americans and civil rights, that would still be pulling up things from the mid-1800s all the way to present day. So when we add a term like Reconstruction, that's really helping us zero in on the time period that we're looking at. So let's take a look at a real-life example. This is the Tri-C Library website, and to get here all you need to do is simply Google Tri-C Library and it will give you a link to this page. Now, to look at a database, we can just click on Subject Guides, and depending on what your subject is, you'd simply click on it here. So let's take a look at history and then go into our general history subject guide. Now, the top two results here are subject-specific guides. So America History and Life is an index of literature, historical abstracts. Will provide you with a variety of abstracts from a wide variety of time periods, as well as different geographical areas. A little farther down, we also have Academic Search Complete, which, even though it is kind of a catch-all database, is a fairly good resource to use for historical research. So, just to take a look at America History and Life. If we were to search for African Americans, we are presented with 20,263 results. But as soon as we add something like the black codes, we drop down to 14. Adding the word Reconstruction would actually take this farther down to 2. So you can see that the more specific your search is, the fewer number of results you're going to have. So this is where the Boolean operators are located by default within this database. If you click it, you'll see that there's and, or, and not. Not is a Boolean operator that you rarely use, but if we were to say, let's say African Americans or blacks. Now we have 56,916. So that's the difference between not using a synonym and using a synonym. So if you find enough material using one phrase, you're perfectly at liberty to do that. It really is a matter of preference. Now, I did want to take you into Academic Search Complete briefly. And you can see here that there are probably some applicable terms here. Now, when you're in any database, whether it's Academic Search Complete, American History and Life, what have you, as long as it's an EBSCO database, which you can tell by the icon up here, you can also limit your search results by clicking on any of the subject thesaurus terms or the subject terms over here. And what you're actually looking at are these subjects. So you can see that African Americans segregation is one of the terms that's been applied as an official controlled vocabulary term for article number 5. A little farther down, though, you'll see that number 7, African American girls, came up as a result because we simply did a keyword search for African Americans. So if we were to go with, let's say, show more, and if we selected African Americans, history, and the black codes, and then updated our results, now we're down to 13 results, and you'll notice that the article dealing with African American girls is no longer present because we got a little more specific with the kinds of material that we wanted to look at. The other thing that I wanted to make you aware of is that in some databases there are either subject term or indices available, and that will actually let you look specifically for the controlled vocabulary word for what you're looking for. So let me give you a quick example. Let's say I wanted to write a paper on the Japanese American internment. Well, that's the popular name for this term, but it is not the controlled vocabulary term. That's not what the database actually tags all of the articles about the internment with. So there are a few different bubbles here, and this is going to be an exercise in if at first you don't succeed, try again. So I did a search for Japanese American internment, and I'm getting things like Japanese American literature, Japanese American authors, soldiers, but the closest thing I'm seeing here is for the Japanese American redress movement, use Japanese Americans evacuation and relocation 1942 to 1945 reparations. Well, that looks pretty close to the internment, but the reparations part isn't quite there. So if you say relevancy ranked, that is going to take what you typed and look for the most likely subject term for that word or phrase. So in this case, we have Japanese Americans, evacuation, and relocation. So to do a search for this term, all you need to do is click the box next to it, click Add. You'll notice that it's been added to the search box. And when you click Search, now every result that we're looking at has that subject term. And from here, we can add additional terms. So that's just a very, very quick look at subject terms, keyword searching. But remember, if you do have any questions, you can always reach out to the library by contacting the main number for the Eastern Campus Library, or you can contact an individual librarian by clicking on the Staff Directory button.